Welcome back. I'm on with Enrico Wolford. He is the editor-in-chief at Capital News in Guyana and also a former president of the Guyana Press Association, a long-standing and well-respected journalist in Guyana. We're talking about press freedom and the latest stunt by President Ofan Ali, who began his second term limiting the number of questions and limiting the invitation list for a news post-inauguration news conference. At least media houses claiming they were kept out, and of course some others saying that the questions were limited, that they were allowed to ask. We're discussing the state of affairs with press freedom in Guyana. They've now ranked 73rd in the world on the Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index. Welcome back to the program, Enrico.
Thank you so much again.
Now, you have been at this for a very long time. Your bio is impressive. You have a lot of experience and you've seen a lot. You've been at the heart of Guyanese media for decades, really. How has the relationship between the government and press changed in your career?
The relationship has moved from one side to the other side to the other side and so on. But essentially, it has remained the same to the point that once governments get in, for some reason, they think that they are now, governments of democracy, God for short, God. And
we had a political party named God in Grenada. It was good old democracy. I kid you not.
So, or guardians of democracy. And I think they forget that the reason they're in there is because they have to sell their ideals, their programs, their policies, their projects to the people. And they use the very press and they use public information campaigns and public relations to do just that. The tendency over the years, particularly in Ghana, is to try to have control. And this is going way back, where in the 60s, I remember Dr. Jagan complaining about not getting the kind of press as when he was premier that he wanted to get. And the funny thing is, the guy who is now the communication consultant to President Ali was thrown out of a press conference by the founder of President Ali's, one of the founders of President Ali's party, the People's Progressive Party, Dr. Jagan. He and a guy named Armstrong, because they were asking Dr. Jagan questions that were in a collision course with the policy, right? And then came the Burnham administration, where there were concerns again that Burnham was a lot more subtle about it, but was very iron-fisted in terms of the control of newsprint. There was no television station around. There were only radio stations, and the radio stations reported a lot of stuff more in favor of the government. And then came Desmond Hoyt. I recall I left Guyana on a taxpayer scholarship to study television, to assist in bringing television to Guyana, right? In the late 70s and early 80s. And when television came in, again, there was this attempt to say, well, you've got to tell our side of the story, more than the other side of the story. But every story, as every journalist knows, has several sides, and at least two. It's like a coin. It has really three sides, because we tend to forget the side with the flat side,
the edges.
that you roll the coin with, the edges. So essentially, what we have always had to do is to fight against this encroaching period under Desmond Hoyt, you had the birth of Stabrook News, and then you had again Dr. Jagan in for a very short time, his wife, and then Mr. Jagdio, who served for 12 years. And again, you had this back and forth. Usually that's a good thing, huh? Because it then helps to cement the the strength of the media and the strength of the Guyana Press Association and all the other organizations that want to see, including organizations like Transparency International, with which I'm connected, including the Guyana Human Rights Association and all the other civil society groups. So essentially, the society then evolved into talking about press freedom, but where what we do talk is not enough. It's what you actually do. It's the action that takes place. So essentially, after that, we still had persons who attempted to control the narrative, and that is the fight down that we are getting now, and that is what we are concerned about. Of course, once we talk about it, persons are going to come with counterpoints. I am not afraid of the counterpoints because that is healthy for a society, healthy for a democracy. But you can't argue that the BBC does this and Ofcom does that and the FCC does that, and you don't have the institutions, the same institutions in place to ensure that justice is served and the information that you get is valid. Look at Guyana. We have had a census done several years ago. And up to now, we are still waiting for the census figures. We are still waiting for the census figures to come out. So I'm trying to figure out.
Why haven't they come out?
Say again?
Why haven't they come out? I mean, I have to ask.
Yeah.
Why?
Your guess is as good as mine, but here's what the feeling is on the ground. In that the census figures would show would bring to the fore issues particularly of ethnic separations within the society and the stratification within the society, household stratifications and what have you. And it may not necessarily be good news. If it were good news, it would have been released a long time ago. People tend to tell you good news, bad news is hide. Sorry, I have to go into the vernacular, but we always hide bad news.
That's quite all right. Humans love the sensational and the bad news and so on. But then the politicians love to hide that. But you yourself, you've had a few run-ins. You are no stranger on the front line of press freedom, and you've gone. Well, the politicians have tried to go toe to toe with you as well, as recent as last year. But you were accused of publishing fake news when you reported that the Minister of the Interior, I believe it was carted off and questioned by the FBI or some other law enforcement in the United States at JFK. And you got a lot of pushback on this. In fact, it is the subject of a lawsuit, I believe, at the moment. What's the story behind that? Can you talk about it? Even if it's before the court?
Well, of course, it was the minister responsible for mines and gold mining and what have you. And I'm an old journalist. I've been around long. This is not my first rodeo. So when blind man tell you can pelt you got brick in your pocket, right? So when I reported what I reported, I knew, I was certain of what happened, because I wouldn't disclose all the source details.
Well,
but
no, I wouldn't expect you to give up your source.
I had evidence to prove that what happened. Okay? Whether you say it was questioned, detained, and so on, I was very particular in the way I wrote it. There was no lawsuit. there was a threat from the minister's lawyer. And my legal team, headed by UC Anderson and included Roysdale Ford and Nigel Hughes, um, they pushed back very in a very direct, in a very strong, in a very unequivocal manner. Because, as I said, I had brick in my pocket. So essentially, even if they denied it, there was evidence to show that there was an interaction that was not necessarily the same cordial interaction that you get at a regular meeting. So there's no lawsuit right now. Nothing happened after our lawyers, particularly the letter written on my behalf by attorney UC Anderson. And because of that pushback, one should stand one's ground. This is not to say, however, Callistra, that journalists don't make mistakes, right? A journalist may hear a story, maybe even be set up. The late Sharif Khan had issues where people set him up. Ricky Singh, God rest the dead, will tell you that there were people who called you. We were certain it was the prime minister of wherever, whatever. And then you discover it wasn't the prime minister, somebody imitating him back in the day and so on. Persons send you information. And if you don't double check that information, if you don't check it as we were taught at Syracuse University, where I went to school, in terms of journalism, you check two independent sources. And independent mean independent, not you told me something and then your auntie or your cousin or your uncle told me the same thing, because more likely it came from you or it came from one side. So you have to check somebody totally unconnected with the individual. And most journalists know that. So, as I said, this is not my first rodeo. I've been around the world and I. So I know that essentially what we put out there must be truthful, must be factual, must be fair, must be objective. And Capital News and all the other newscasts in Guyana that are reputable go that route. There are times, of course, that the runner stumbles. You get a false start. Somebody feeds you wrong information, and sometimes deliberately. But that does not mean that you must not hold to the ethics and to the responsibilities of proper journalism.
And so, because there were some very strong accusations against you from the, you were accused of treason, of I believe someone wrote saying that what you had done bordered on treason, and a few other serious infractions against the state, really. And they seem to have felt very strongly about it. Why do you think they came out so strongly if, as you say, your information was verified and what you reported was accurate, verified, it passed the test that we've all learned we must put our information to before we can put it out there? Why do you think they were still so very strong and to the point of having a lawyer write you? Was,
Well, let me put it this way. Lawyers' letters mean nothing to me unless it's followed up by action. Huh? Um, and even if we go to court, we must be able to prove what we have done, and he who asserts must prove. Now, what you may have read on social media would, I know, came from acolytes, supplicants, sycophants from the ruling party who were sent, to demean, to diminish, to denigrate, to ensure that you don't exist, And even now, people will say that, wait, Capital News still exists? What are y'all doing? And ads are pulled from you by persons who have traditionally advertised with you, but the idea, with no pun intended, is to paint you black and hope that you ride off into the sunset. But not I, said Enrico Wolford of Capital News.
And it almost seems as you're relating that the playbook in Guyana was borrowed by Grenada or vice versa, the playbook for seeking to suppress the free press. Do you believe that things like threats of lawsuits and withholding of advertising and so forces, do you see self-censorship on the rise? Not just Guyana, but if you're looking at the broader picture of the region. But of course, drilling down on Guyana, which is where you operate, is self-censorship an issue because of fear over lawsuits? I mean, most journalists aren't rolling in money, and the possibility of a judgment in the court certainly is a cause for concern for them. Um, are we self-censoring as a result of these threats that are coming from politicians and corporate and wherever else?
Unfortunately, we are self-censoring. Unfortunately, as I said at the opening of this program, there's some amount of press concubinage now. So persons are concerned that, look, I have to eat, I have to live somewhere, and that's the danger. There's a book by a guy named Tussman, Tussman, talking about government and the mind. And so often we don't realize how integral government is to the society. Almost all the information you get on yourself comes from a government agency, except your baptismal certificate. And what Guyanese would call your christening. Your birth certificate comes from the government. Your inoculation, your health records come from the government if you didn't go to a private hospital all your life. Your tax records are government. Your social security records are government. I could go down the list. Your immigration records are government. So essentially your education records, your school records for the most part, if you go to a government school. So you exist only when the state says that you do. And the state can decide using taxes, using even the banking system to strong arm you into position. And that's the purpose of the press, to ensure that persons are not corralled into believing and accepting everything. Governments do right across the world, but governments also have to be held accountable. And not only governments, as I said, but private sector organization, corporate bodies have to be held accountable. Airlines have to be held accountable. Water taxis, whatever, they have to be held accountable. And the legacy press, the traditional press, they are there to ensure that they serve as a conduit between the people and power. They must be able to speak truth to power. And if power has a difficulty accepting the truth, then the people will make a decision. That is not to say that because you got 240,000 votes against somebody who got 180,000 votes, that you are going to neglect the 180,000. You have to be the head of state, the government for all the people. Take all of that into account and work towards that. But it's not for me, as Enrico Wolford, a journalist, to lecture the servant leaders as to how they ought to behave. They ought to know how they ought to behave. That's what they signed up for. And we will hold them accountable as members of the press.
As we should, as we should. Now, Reporters Without Borders called for a reset um, with the relationship between the Guyanese government and the media. What do you think such a reset should look like?
The reset must begin with access to information must begin with the removal of weaponizing of various pieces of legislation, including sedition, including cyber crime and what have you. The reset has to begin with um, the uh, the immediate cessation of um, calling people names in terms of denigrating them and demeaning them and diminishing their worth, and also to have a conversation, to have dialogue with the press, and not think that your job as the servant leader is to control the press and to tell them when to open the door and when to close the door. You are not the maid in Miami or on the Jeffersons. Your job is well, the government is the maid, really. Let
Yeah,
me put it this way.
yes.
But you must behave as if you you're telling the employer this is the way that you must act and you must behave. The employer, I repeat, the employer is the people, or the employers are the people of the state, of the society. And we have to take all those people into account. One of my professors used to say, one of the things about democracy, one of the definitions is it is a majority of minority interests. Therefore, you have to take all the people, all the groups, the disabled, the challenged, those who don't like you, those who love you to death. You have to take all of that and you have to be able to manage that. And that's why you have put yourself up for that purpose. And again, whether you are selling beef at the corner or you are implementing government programs, you have to be held to a standard that you wouldn't poison people with bad beef, right? Or you wouldn't poison the mind of people into thinking that you are some godlike figure. The voice of the people is the voice of God.
Definitely. Um, as we close off the interview, Enrico, I want to ask you about the broader, for a broader view beyond Guyana, your view on the state of press freedom in the wider Caribbean. Are we heading on the right track? I mean, I talked about the numbers earlier. Trinidad at 19th, I think Suriname 32nd, Jamaica at 29th or so. The OECS as a block, as we ranked as a block at 48th. Are we heading in the right direction, or do you see mounting pressures across the territories when it comes to defending and protecting press freedom?
We are not necessarily heading in the right direction, but we could change course. We could chart a new course. And because we're such beautiful people, living in beautiful islands and countries, we ought to be able to rise to the level that not only our beaches and our hotels and our entertainment and our sport and our ambiance held to that high level and appreciated by persons coming into the society, but our institutions must also be held to a higher standard. And the press, as an institution, as the fourth estate, ought to be treated a lot differently. The press people are not public relations people. They are not there to make you look good, make the society look good. They are there to be a mirror to the society, to be able to report to the society the good in the society and the ills in the society. And how could we rectify, correct, and make sure that we go the right path? And the right path is decided by the people and the legislature and the judiciary and the executive in a society working as a group to to accomplish that ideal goal. But we always compare ourselves to some of the persons who used to be our masters at one time. But the reason that those societies work is that those societies have institutions that will ensure that there are checks and balances, that persons do not go out on a limb and do, as I said earlier on, stupidness. And even some of the big societies, the progressive societies that we are in now or we visit, we tend to say, oh, well, look what is happening in this country or that country and so on,
We
right?
love that.
We love to do that. But it is, my mother used to say, is not how many children beat you in class, it's how many children you beat in terms of bringing first or, second or third. So don't compare yourself with others, but set yourself a standard. And I think the societies in the Caribbean have to set themselves a standard with regard to press freedom and the ideals and the ethos of a proper environment for the press. And the society itself must allow the press to function freely.
Well said. I want to thank you so much for joining me here on The Narrative, Enrico Wolford, the editor-in-chief of the Capital News and a very accomplished Guyanese journalist with decades of experience. Thank you so much. And the former president of the Guyana Press Association. Thank you so much for joining me on The Narrative. It was a wonderful experience chatting with you here on the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, too.
This is The Narrative. I'm your storyteller, Callistra Faria. Back in a moment.
Show them the way I